Let's bring in MKB and find out. A lot of talent on this roster, Michael. Some of the guys that we saw, Korkmaz, Jonah Bolden, not a room for all these guys, right? So you're going to have some talented guys. Where do you think some of the guys we saw in the Summer League are going to end up in October?
Yeah, definitely, Mike. I think it's a good problem for the Sixers to have. For once, they almost have, kind of like you alluded to, too much talent. Obviously, for the roster right now, there's not enough spots to go around for all of the guys that showed a lot of promise in the Summer League. One name, obviously, that jumped out, I think, to a lot of people watching, in Vegas and Utah was, Jonah Bolden, who he'll be playing overseas in Israel next year. Tel Aviv for 1 year. I think a lot of people thought that maybe he had shown enough to, garner a contract with the Sixers this year, at least maybe a two-way deal. But, it works out pretty well both ways. He'll get, some seasoning overseas, some experience, kind of, very similar to a Korkmaz or a Dario Saric situation where he'll be playing, in the EuroLeague at a high level under, an NBA caliber coach and get some experience. And, will be a little bit more mature by the time he's ready to come over and contribute to the Sixers. Korkmaz was another guy that, came over this year after being drafted in the first round by the team last year. Showed, he showed some flashes in Vegas. I think there was obviously, a lot of room for development in his game, a lot of things he could work on. I think he'll probably spend, he signed his contract. He's coming over. I think a lot of his time this year will probably be spent down in Delaware with the 87ers, just kind of working on conditioning, getting his body, a little bit more prepared for the NBA game. But I think, between those two guys and a couple other guys, Alex Poitras showed a lot of promise. A couple other guys, I think there'll be some intriguing options for the Sixers to look at as far as, the bottom of the roster spots or potentially guys to stash down in Delaware or elsewhere.
Yeah, you look at even guys who play or didn't play on the Summer League team, but a guy like Justin Anderson, what's his role?
Yeah, that's a great question. The guys, him, even Nick Stauskas, I think you're going to see guys that played a pretty big role on the team last year or in seasons past that are going to have a lot tougher time seeing the court this year. Which obviously it's a good problem for the Sixers as a team to have. But some of these guys, they're going to have to fight for a spot. I think now you'd look at Justin Anderson's a guy that's probably projected somewhere down the depth chart, maybe backing up, a Robert Covington at the small forward spot. But then you have, TLC, who obviously looked improved down in Summer League. His game looked like, he took a step in development from his rookie year last year. So he's going to be in the mix for, some of that time. Obviously, Dario and Robert will hold down a lot of the minutes at the forward spot. So I think training camp this year, for especially, I think will be interesting when it comes around. I think there'll be a lot of, pretty intriguing positional battles. I think you could pretty much have a pretty good idea what the starting lineup is going to look like, assuming everyone's healthy and ready to go on opening night. But I think, the depth in the rotation will be, really interesting and something that's going to shake out over the rest of the offseason and into the, training camp.
I'm interested from you on your take. What's Bayless's role? Where do they, because you got Fultz, you got Redick, and Simmons. You would think those three guys are kind of going to get a lot of minutes in the backcourt. Where does Bayless kind of rotate his way in there? Plus, you got TLC, you got Stauskas, you've got McConnell. So I'm interested to see how they shuffle those guys.
Yeah, Bayless is kind of the forgotten man for a lot of people, obviously, since he, really didn't get to play for the team last season. I think, he's penciled in right now as the the backup to Markelle. Markelle will probably, obviously be the team's starting point guard, then Jared, if he's obviously, healthy and good to go, and then probably TJ. I think Jared's a guy that'll probably get around 20 minutes a game. He brings that versatility factor that he could play either guard position really, so he could come in, and play behind Markelle as like the starting point guard, or he could also come off and play off ball next to, Ben or Markelle or any of those guys. So I think his skill set, it fits well. That's why they brought him in last year. They obviously didn't get to see too much of him last year, but the reasons that they brought him in are still there in his game. I think he's definitely a guy that I think will get some solid tick as probably a top reserve guard for this team going into the season.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain's with us here, looking at the Sixers, kind of putting a bow on the summer. Embiid, Holmes, Okafor, You've got obviously Dario, Amir Johnson. It's a crowded house in that at that forward center spot too.
Yeah, it's crowded all around. I think, obviously the addition of Amir Johnson kind of makes it a little bit interesting on the one-year role. That's a guy, he's in there on to be a veteran mentor to these guys, but it's still, he's still a guy that competes and can contribute at a very high level. So I really expect him to get not start, but get a good chunk of, minutes coming off the bench. And then, assuming that Robert Covington starts, you have Dario who'll be playing, a whole lot of minutes coming off the bench too. Rashawn probably projected to back up Joel, which leaves, the man that's still been on the roster to this day, I think much to the surprise of a lot of people, obviously Big Ja. He's still here. He's still a Sixer. I think that's a big question if where and when he'll get any minutes on the roster this year with, how crowded the front court's really become.
Michael, is there a guy who you think surprises people in camp and maybe makes the team? Is there a dark horse candidate that the listener should keep an eye on?
This year compared to recent years, Pete, I think that the roster's pretty well set. There's not really as much space for, a guy to really come in as, say, maybe T.J. McConnell did a couple years ago or Rashawn. There's not a lot of space for a guy like that. One guy that really stuck out to me from Summer League was Alex Poitras. I think he showed the team a lot of versatility and could potentially be an option for, maybe a two-way contract, the new type of contract in the league that is basically split between the NBA and the D League. It means you spend, the bulk of the season in the D League. You can spend, I think, up to, a certain amount of days up in the league. So I think he's one guy to look at for a potential deal like that. Brandon Austin played pretty well for the Sixers in Vegas also. He's had some troubles off the court, but I think they were pretty impressed with what he brought to the team and his poise and experience. So he's another guy potentially that, I think to kind of turn some heads this summer. So it'll be interesting to see, those last couple spots and also guys that they might want to, send down in Delaware to kind of keep the rotation deep as far as this team for moving forward.
How deep, how many guys in the rotation do you see?
I know Brett last year found, when the team was really clicking in January, he expressed comfort and they were going about 9, 10 at the max deep consistently. I think that, there's a lot of talent on this team this year. So by default, I think he'll feel a little bit more comfortable reaching into the bench because you'll be looking at guys that are, just a little bit more talented toward the end of the bench than in past seasons. So I think, they'll probably end up having about a 12-man rotation, the starting team, a backup, and a couple of guys that they fluctuate in and out of the lineup. But, it's definitely going to be interesting just based off the increase in talent overall that's on the roster. I think that'll be just lead to a more balanced roster for Brett to really work with from the beginning.
I would guess, Michael, the next big question between now and whenever would be the Okafor saga, right? I mean, is that it, or are you intrigued by him? I mean, he looked like he lost a lot of weight. There's been some good stuff coming out about him. Is he an intriguing guy or more of a trade storyline?
To me, he still remains an intriguing guy. I'm pretty resigned to the fact, as I think a lot of people are, that Philly, as currently constructed, it just isn't probably the best fit for him. I still think that he could be a productive NBA player, and I still, I would not be surprised if he was on the roster when the season starts. Obviously, they've been entertaining offers for him, but nothing has really made them jump, and they haven't been, it doesn't seem like they're just giving him away. I think that having him in the reserve role for, under 2 more years, under a decent contract, at the worst case scenario, he walks next year and, that's it. I don't think that they mind having him on. And, best case scenario is he does come in. Like you said, he looks like he's been, in a little bit better shape, putting in work on the areas of his game that he's needed to improve. And if he can come in and, in a reserve role and turn some heads and be productive, maybe, it'll only help himself and potentially his spot with the Sixers.
You're going to see Jaleel coming out as a stretch 4, banging threes, right?
That'd be something to see.
over at Stockton there, just drain. I have heard that they might be back at Stockton.
Yeah, there has been some talk about that. I mean, I'm sure we'll find out in due time.
Yes. Michael Kaskey-Blomain, keep that under your hat there, Pete Thompson. Sports Pass Live. Sorry, I'm sorry. Sports Pass Live, 97.3 ESPN. Michael, you could use that. Well, we got plenty more, of course, throughout the summer. The Sixers, though, I guess that the summer league ends. The bow is put. And there should be a little downtime for really one of the hottest topics in town for a while there. But, of course, you can check out Michael Kaskey-Blomain on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB and here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. All right, Mike, take care, pal.
Thanks, fellas. Have a good one.